Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Meet the Candidates event for Assembly District 112. All candidates on the ballot were invited, and this event was organized by the League of Women Voters of Saratoga County. This event will be recorded and posted on our website in its entirety. The video taken tonight is the property of the League and can only be used by the League or licensed media according to FCC regulations. It may not be used by any candidate except to post a link to the complete video. We do not make this request lightly. We have had recent experiences where candidates or their supporters have used portions of our video or an audience member's own video against their opponent. Obviously, this can damage our ability to organize these forums if candidates feel the video will be used against them. The League is a nonpartisan, and the use of the video by a campaign specifically against another candidate goes against our purpose. This behavior would discredit us with candidates, making it difficult for us to sponsor future forums. Posting these videos is a breach of trust and very disrespectful of the League. All candidates participating this evening have pledged that they will abide by our policy. My name is Peck, Kelleher, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Saratoga County, and I will be your moderator tonight. The League of Women Voters of Saratoga County is a nonpartisan volunteer political organization dedicated to the informed and responsible participation of citizens in government. The League never supports or opposes any political party or candidate. That has been the League's policy since 1920. Membership is open to anyone who is eligible to register and vote, whether male or female. Please consider joining your local league. We have received our questions in advance tonight, and these have been reviewed by league members, and the questions have been selected to be representative and to avoid redundancy. Questions of a personal nature are not included. We have timers for this event, and cards will be held up for the candidates to glance at. The green will mean that you have 1 minute left to speak. The yellow means you have 30 seconds left, and the red means that the time is up. The candidates for the New York Assembly District 112 in alphabetical order are Joe Seeman. He's running on the Democrat and Working Party Families line. And Mary Beth Walsh, she's running on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence line. Now it is time to hear their 2-minute opening statements. They have drawn lots to determine the order, and the first speaker is Mary Beth Walsh. Mary Beth?
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate and to my opponent for his participation. I've had the privilege and honor of representing the 112th Assembly District for the past 4 years, and I'm seeking another term to continue my public service to the 9 towns, 2 villages, and around 130,000 people that I represent. My first 4 years in office have been very busy. I've succeeded in passing local legislation establishing Kins Road Park. I introduced a bill of statewide importance to help provide a living allowance to help adults with disabilities. And I've introduced another bill to encourage more organ donation in New York State. I've served on 7 different assembly committees that are reflective of my background and experience, including Children and Families and Education, where I currently am the minority ranking member. My service on the executive board of the Bipartisan Legislative Women's Caucus has helped me to get to know my colleagues across the aisle and to find common ground so we can better work together on issues of common concern. That's more important than ever because during these past 4 years, I've seen a profound change in our legislature, a lack of balance, reason, and moderation. In 2018, the previously Republican Senate flipped to Democrat. Now everything from the Assembly to the Senate to the governor's office are all in the same party. Where there used to be compromise, amendments, and consensus building across the aisle, that's no longer considered necessary by the party in power. The practical result has been a discernible shift to the left, politically and legislatively. Bills that would never have seen the light of day now go to the floor and they're passed. With 30 years of experience as an attorney, I read the bills closely, I get on my feet, and I debate them. I was recently appointed to lead debate on the floor of the Assembly, which has been a great honor. I'm running for another term because I want to continue this work and advocacy for my community and because I want to try to voice reason and balance in a progressively more imbalanced branch of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe? Seeman, it's your turn.
Thank you to the League for creating this important opportunity to hear the candidates. My name is Joe Seeman. I've lived most of my life here in Saratoga County, raised my kids here, sent them to the schools here. I love the natural beauty, culture, and the people of our capital region. I'm a 30-plus year union member, retired civil servant, and also a volunteer activist, fighting for our communities. I've fought for our health care and frontline workers. I've walked the picket lines. I've fought to protect our sacred environment. I've stood up to billionaire corporations and political corruption, and for real democracy, which means representing our main streets, not Wall Street. This is why I've received dozens of endorsements, including from the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, the Nurses Association, CWA, the Teamsters and Painters Unions, Citizen Action, and U.S. Senators Schumer and Gillibrand. This district deserves a full-time assembly member who will have a say in how our taxes are spent, will hold town halls and listen to the people, and fight for all of us in these turbulent times. Healthcare is a human right. I'll co-sponsor the New York Health Act so that every New Yorker can see a doctor when they're sick. We only have one planet and we need to protect it. I'll introduce legislation to create our own clean energy right here in upstate New York with green jobs that can't be outsourced. I'll work to close corporate loopholes. I'll co-sponsor Phil Steck's bill to restore the stock transfer tax to make sure Wall Street pays its fair share. I'm running to be your voice in the assembly, to fight to make our upstate New York a place people want to move to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it is time for our questions. The candidates will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. You are not required to respond, and you may pass if you wish. You will have 2 red cards during the question and answer session to provide an additional 1 minute to add to your response or to respond to something another candidate has said. The timer and I will keep track of the number of red cards that are used, and questions will be directed to the candidates in rotation so that everyone will get a chance to respond first. The first question will go with Joe. I'm sorry, the first question will go to Mary Beth. And the question is, what is the #1 challenge in your district right now, and how would you go about dealing with that challenge?
It helps if you unmute. I think that the biggest challenge right now is the COVID pandemic and how it's affected our state, how it's affected our district. And I think that looking at the next legislative session, I think that that's the biggest thing that we're going to have to try to deal with. You know, with the shutdown of our economy, I think that the benefit has been a very low infection rate, but it's come at a great cost. I think that there are a number of businesses, small businesses, restaurants, et cetera, in the district that are just not going to make it. And I think that trying to make sure that they get on a solid footing. I think that another big issue for me that stems from COVID also are the nursing home deaths. I think that we've had a significant loss of life in our state, many elderly, and I think that we need to try to get to the bottom of to answer the question of how many of those deaths resulted from individuals who were in nursing homes, whether they went to the hospital or passed away in the nursing home. So that's something else that we really need to work on. I think that COVID has really exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in our district. The northern part of our district and other spots do not have adequate broadband to help support students who are doing virtual learning. As the assembly ranker on the education committee, I've been working very hard to try to help school administrators, students, teachers, parents understand the return to school and to try to facilitate that as best we can. So those are just a few of the issues.
Joe Seeman, the question is, what is the #1 challenge in the district right now, and how would you go about dealing with that challenge? Joe, you are on mute.
Okay, so COVID is part of a larger problem, the problem of healthcare. And we can have a healthcare system in New York where every New Yorker can see a doctor when they're sick. I'll support the New York Health Act, which my opponent has voted against. We need to have a healthcare system where 98% of us will save money, and we're stopping the payment of corporate welfare to insurance companies, which is completely unnecessary. So I will work in the assembly, I'll be in the majority, and I'll fight to have that passed. And regarding to COVID-19, yes, we sure need broadband. I think we should make internet access a public utility, just like electricity. Everyone should have it. Every student should have access to the internet. Our rural areas should be able to have the jobs that internet access requires. So I'll fight in the Assembly majority to pass legislation to make sure that everyone in New York has internet access, everyone in New York has health care, and we can take on all of these problems and pass legislation and see New York be a real leader.
Thank you. The next question, Joe Seeman will answer first. What proposals do you have to help local governments manage the loss of tax revenue due to the pandemic?
Very, very good question. Well, we see massive cuts that local governments are facing. We see huge budget shortfalls. And there is just one way we can solve that. And the way is to close corporate loopholes. Make the ultra wealthy pay their fair share. My opponent has spoken out against this. She's called for austerity, but we need to simply make the rich pay their fair share. There are tax breaks for buying yachts, tax breaks for buying private jets. We don't need that. If we simply make the ultra wealthy pay their fair share, we reverse all the giveaways. There have been giveaways to the rich they don't need for decades. We can fully fund our local governments. We can fully fund our schools. We can do this without cutting from our services, without cutting anything, and without balancing the budget on the backs of working and middle-class New Yorkers. So that's the main way we can protect our local governments, protect our services, and have a government that works for all of us, doesn't just work for the big corporate interests who have too much political power, who I've been fighting against for decades.
Thank you, Joe. Mary Beth Walsh, what proposals do you have to help governments manage the loss of tax revenue due to the pandemic? You're still on mute.
Gosh, I appreciate that question. I myself came up through local government. I was a member of our planning board, zoning board, town board here in the town of Walston for a number of years. So I really do understand the impact, particularly when you have a town like Walston that has no town tax or highway tax. When they don't receive the monies from the state, like CHIPS funding, like aid to municipalities money, it really does have a severe impact. At the county level, it's a big problem because the Medicaid program that we have, 25% of that is borne on the backs of the localities to pay for it. So I disagree with my opponent in the sense that I do not believe that taxing people, whether they're billionaires, ultra billionaires, millionaires, however you want to define it, is the only solution. I do think that in a $168 billion state budget, there is plenty of room to cut. I think that we need to look there first, and I think taxes are a last resort. So I think that there is more than one way. I am supportive of a bill that would have the state take back off the counties the 25% of the Medicaid cost. I think that the Hollywood tax credits that are being put out there, the comptroller's office just came out with 5 audits spotting $700 million worth of waste and mismanagement in the Medicaid system. So I think that there is room for austerity. Everything's on the table because we're in a pandemic, but for me, taxation and increasing taxes on people is the wrong way to go. Last resort for me.
Thank you. Joe, would you like to use your red card now? You are on mute, but you can use it right now. Thank you.
Okay.
You have 1 minute.
So what every economist has said is that when you're in an economic downturn, in a spiraling economy that we have right now with millions of people losing their jobs, the wrong thing, the absolute wrong thing to do is to spend less. Government needs to fill the gaps and see that there's money in our economy. So cuts, austerity that my opponent has talked about, cuts are the very, very wrong thing. We need to make sure simply that we tax the ultra wealthy and that none of our services, our schools are facing a 20% cuts across the board. Our local governments, we need to protect our parks, our roads. We can't do this if we have cuts. We need that money simply to come from the ultra wealthy who can easily afford it, and we can fund everything we need and make sure that that money is spent to keep our jobs going, keep our economy going. That's what every economist says. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will go to Mary Beth Walsh first. Please assess the impacts of COVID on our region. Are we equipped and staffed at adequate levels? And what additional resources are needed if there is a second wave?
I don't know. I don't know that I fully understand the question. I mean, I think we were just talking about COVID and the impact on our communities. So I don't want to be repetitive. I think that we need to. I think that we need to try to be supportive of communities that are struggling through this, businesses that are struggling through it, individuals who have lost their jobs. My office has been very busy through the last few months, trying to assist people apply for unemployment, try to assist businesses as they try to reopen, try to assist schools as they try to reopen, and advocate for visitation between people and individuals in group homes, people in nursing homes. I mean, there's so much that we need to do, and I mean, I think as a so-called part-time legislator, it's not felt very part-time over the last 6 months or so. It's been very busy, and I'm very happy to do the work. I think that we need to try to work together to get us all through this difficult time, and I stand ready to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, the question is, please assess the impact of COVID on our region. Are we equipped and staffed at adequate levels, and what additional resources might be needed?
Well, first of all, I pledge to be a full-time legislator, not a part-time legislator like my opponent. And what we need here, our frontline workers, they need our support. The nurses, the New York State Nurses Association, which has endorsed my campaign, they've said that we need safe staffing levels. And I've been there outside the hospitals in our region, standing with them on the picket line. We need to make sure that there aren't too few nurses and too many patients. We need to protect the nurses, the healthcare workers, and the patients at the same time. And of course, we need to make sure that we have adequate funding. And if we have the New York Health Act, which will provide healthcare for all of us, that will also make sure that our hospitals are fully funded. So we need to listen to those frontline workers. We can't just call them heroes. We need to treat them like heroes. And that's why I'm for safe staffing levels. I'm for protections for our workers. And I'm for making sure there's full funding to protect our healthcare workers, protect our patients, and help us recover from this COVID crisis.
Thank you, Joe. Our next question will go to Joe Seeman first. Access to high-speed internet is more critical than ever. What plans do you have to help the areas of the district that lack it?
Okay. Well, we need to treat internet access as a necessity. It's a necessity in today's age. We know there are students today who are learning some hybrid mode where they're learning from home, and those who don't have good internet access don't have as good educations. We know there are many jobs, people working from home, but if you don't have high-speed internet access, you can't do that too well. But we can treat our internet access just like electricity. If you go back 60 or 70 years ago, not everybody's homes had electricity, but we made that a priority. Let's remember, the United Nations has said that internet access is a human right. We can make it a reality. We can invest. We can put people to work too, creating internet access as a basic human right, as a public utility, just like electricity, so that everyone in upstate New York, everyone here in our most rural areas, in our poorer areas, everyone can have equal access to the internet. And that's very important as far as rebuilding our economy and recovering from the economic crisis that we're facing. So these are the things we need to make upstate New York a place that people want to move to, not move away from. Let's have health care, let's have fair taxation, and let's have internet access for all of us.
Thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, access to high-speed internet is more critical than ever. What plans do you have to help areas that lack it?
This is actually an area where I think that I'm in agreement with my opponent. I think that the reason is that it's really an issue that crosses party lines. I think that we, as upstate residents, understand that not only is there a need for broadband and high-speed internet, but basic cell phone coverage is necessary in portions of our district. There are areas where we don't have it, and it's really a safety issue. I absolutely agree that it's a shame that we have students that have to go to and sit outside of a library to try to pick up on internet services at a hot spot outside of a library and some parking lot to be able to get their schoolwork done. I think that it is an issue of equity, and I think just as I have supported the investments in other kinds of infrastructure, road, bridge, SWAP, which is the infrastructure of sewer and water that goes under the roads. I think that high-speed internet, good cell phone coverage, this is all important in order to attract businesses to our area and to make, to allow for education of our students and to improve the quality of living here. I think it's an issue where in the hollowing out of New York State, upstate New York is real. And I think that the lack of broadband and that type of infrastructure upstate is just one piece of evidence of that.
Thank you. First to answer this question will be Mary Beth Walsh. The equal enforcement of the law is a concern of many citizens. What reforms do you support to make everyone safe and the system more just?
Equal enforcement of the law, I don't know that I really understand where that question is going. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Certainly. The equal enforcement of the law is a concern of many citizens. What reforms do you support to make sure that everyone is safe and the system is more just?
I don't know. I think that we have a justice system that in recent years has become more skewed to benefit those accused of crime. I think that things like raise the age, which increased the age of criminal responsibility from 16 to 18, the repeal of 50A, the creation of so-called bail reform and discovery reforms. I actually think that the net result of those has been to make our communities less safe. I think that if you take a look at Albany County, for example, there's in just this year, there's an 800% increase in homicide. There's an over 300% increase in gun violence. And I think that one of the things that I think we need to do as a legislature is to re-examine those so-called reforms that were pushed through once the Senate flipped a couple years ago, and to really re-examine and look at the unintended consequences of those, where if you create a revolving door where you're having individuals charged with crime just processed and let right back out on the street to commit more crime, I don't think it keeps our communities safe. So those are some of the things that I'd like to work on once I return to Albany.
Thank you. Joe Seeman, the equal enforcement of the law is a concern of many citizens. What reforms do you support to make everyone safe and the system more just?
Okay. So first of all, we need to make sure that whether you're rich or you're poor, regardless of your financial status, you're treated equally. And what we have here is a situation where my opponent wants people who have lots of money to be able to get out of jail when they're arrested, but people without money to stay in jail. That's just plain wrong, and it's a ripoff keeping people in jail that we have to pay taxes to cover. So that's one important issue. We need to make sure that everyone, including the police, abide by the laws. And we need to say, first of all, that Black Lives Matter. And I've marched with Black Lives Matter marches here in Clifton Park. My opponent wasn't there. We've had a Black Lives Matter rally in Ballston Spa. I was there. We need to make sure that police are accountable and that police misconduct is transparent. You see, if we weed out the bad cops, all of our police departments will have the trust and the confidence of the people, and that will truly strengthen our police departments. So these are the things that we can do for fairness, for justice. I've been fighting for justice, for fairness for decades, and I'm going to fight for it in the Assembly majority, and I will introduce legislation and see that that legislation is passed and be a real voice for our people on this.
Thank you, Joe. Mary Beth Walsh, I saw you raise your red card. Would you like to respond for 1 minute?
Yes, I would. Thank you. So I just think I wanted to address some of the statements that my opponent made, which I believe misrepresent the way that I feel about this particular situation. I think that after years really of a very liberal driven agenda, and the policies have really emboldened criminal behavior. They've scaled back penalties, and they've undermined the authority of law enforcement agencies to provide public safety for the communities. Now, there were a number of bills that came through the legislature, a couple of different packages, and some of them I supported. I definitely supported ones that, for example, banned chokeholds, and there was a whole package of a bunch of different bills. I absolutely believe that law enforcement officers who do not follow the rules and who break the law in the way that they either detain or arrest individuals, they should be held accountable for it. I absolutely do support that. As far as the different rallies and things like that, I was not invited to them. I don't know about them. I saw them on the news. That's all.
Thank you, Mary Beth. We will now move on to our next question. Joe Seeman will answer first. Many voters are looking for reassurance that the upcoming election will be safe and fair, and every citizen's right to vote will be protected. How would you reassure them? Joe?
Okay, well, I've been a long advocate of electoral reform, voting reform. One of the things that I've long supported, and I came to the Capitol as a citizen activist, was to call for early voting, so we don't have to have everyone coming in on election day, which my opponent voted against. So we need to have automatic voter registration, make it easier for people to vote. We need to make it easier for people to vote by mail. We can do all these things here in New York. We can also, if we're talking about how important our votes are, we can take on the real corruption of money in politics. And when big money influences politicians, our voters' voices are too small. So we need to empower voters, make the voices of voters more powerful by taking away the overwhelming voice of big money corruption.
Thank you, Joe. Mary Beth Walsh. Many voters are looking for reassurance that the upcoming election will be safe and fair and every citizen's right to vote will be protected. How would you reassure them?
I think that this is going to be probably the most crazy election this year that we've had in a long, long time, if ever, just because of the 9 days of early voting, the thousands and thousands and thousands of absentee ballots that are out there. I'd like to talk a little bit about the early voting, and it kind of brings up an issue that I want your viewers to know about, which is very often legislative and policy changes are shoved into budget bills. You know, our state budget is usually about 10 separate bills, and each one of them is kind of like a sandwich of all kinds of stuff that can be rolled into it. So I don't believe that early voting was a standalone bill, but my preference, and I think the preference of most people that I talk to, is for in-person voting on election day. Now this year, obviously because of the pandemic, people needed other options. And I did support the idea of no excuse absentee voting. I do support a constitutional amendment to make that permanent so that people do not need to show that they're out of the county or they're unable to vote in person in order to do it. I do support that. I think that if we allowed no excuse absentee voting, I think that that would solve a lot of the issues that we've got with voting and voting participation. I think that would really help. So although I don't support same-day voting or same-day voter registration, and I don't like the idea of, oh, see, I'm running out of time. I guess it's a mixed bag. I support some of the things, and I think people should be reassured that it's going to be okay.
Mary Beth Walsh, the next question will go to you. First, quality childcare can be difficult to find or to afford. If elected, what actions would you take to address the crisis in childcare?
Okay, so this is actually an issue that's very close to my heart, having 6 children who are a little bit older now, so it's not as much of an issue, but I think that it's a big problem for people, whether you have means or you don't have means. I think it's finding good quality childcare is very difficult. This is actually something that I've been able to learn more about and partner with majority members through the Legislative Women's Caucus. We decided that there was that was a theme that we wanted to kind of work on as a caucus during the last couple of years. We wanted to look at the fact that women very often are responsible for childcare at the beginning of a child's life, but we also are dealing with end-of-life issues and issues with our aging parents and aging relatives. So I think that providing proper funding, whether in the form of childcare credit, is an important way to address this and try to assist people who are struggling to, because most people, most families now have 2-income families. It's something that's really critically important. And I think, again, during COVID, we're really seeing the holes in our system when we have students that are only going to school on certain days and then they're home on certain days and you've got parents working. It's just a big problem. It's just one more thing that we've been forced to really take a hard look at through this COVID crisis.
Thank you. Joe Seeman, quality childcare can be difficult to find or to afford. If elected, what actions would you take to address the crisis in childcare?
Well, I agree with my opponent. We definitely need tax credits for childcare. And I will be part of the Assembly majority and make sure that that's in the budget, that we have tax credits. And we also need to make sure that we can provide government funding to help people with childcare. And you can't do that with an austerity budget that my opponent is called for. We need, again here, simply to close the loopholes, make the ultra wealthy pay their fair share, and we can afford that. We also need to make sure, when we're concerned about people taking care of their children and their parents, we need to have paid, not just paid sick leave, but paid family leave. That's something that we all need for our elderly parents as well as for taking care of our children. So these are the things that we can do. We have to put our money where our mouth is and really do something, not just talk about it, but really do something with our budget, with our laws, to make sure that we help those people who need childcare. You know, my family, we need childcare. My grandchildren, my kids, we're facing the same problem that everyone is here. So I will fight in the assembly to make sure that providing funds for child care is in our budget.
Joe, thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, I saw you hold up your second red card. Would you like to respond for 1 minute?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I think it's important, since my opponent continues to talk about the New York Health Act, to just address that quickly. Vermont is the only state that passed legislation to do this, and 3.5 years later, the governor abandoned the plan because it was so unworkable in terms of its cost. The New York Health Plan would need to raise between, and this is a huge range, $91.5 billion and $226 billion in new tax revenue. And and there's the loss of, we've projected 175,000 workers in the New York insurance industry could lose their jobs if the New York Health Act was passed. So those are just a couple of the reasons why I'm not in favor of that. And I think it's kind of interesting that, you know, my opponent says it's important to put our money where our mouth is, but it sounds like he's putting other people's money where his mouth is on that one. So thank you.
Thank you. Joe Seeman, I also see that you raised your second red card. Would you like to respond for 1 minute?
So I'm talking about the ultra wealthy's money, the people who've avoided paying their fair share. We know Trump doesn't pay his taxes, and it's not just because he's a con man, but it's because we've got laws that allow the ultra wealthy to avoid paying taxes. Everybody knows this. So here's what the New York Health Act would do. It would save us money, because yes, there would be money to pay for it, but we'd be paying less. When we count all the money that we're paying to insurance companies, that's corporate welfare and completely unnecessary. Now, our local governments would save massive amounts of money. Our school districts, our towns would all save money on healthcare costs, and that would allow us to lower taxes for people here in upstate New York. And if we remove from the employer's responsibility healthcare, that will make it much easier. I've spoken to many small business owners who say that if we had a healthcare program and they wouldn't need to worry about that when they're hiring people, they'd be able to hire more people, and that would mean more jobs, saving money, saving lives.
Thank you. Our next question will go to Joe Seeman first. Our schools, police, and hospital ERs bear the brunt of the problems resulting from mental illness, but teachers, law enforcement officers, and first responders often say they are not trained or equipped for this task. How would you propose handling these issues?
Sure. Well, we need to make sure that we have mental health professionals, that we have opioid addiction professionals who are able to respond to these situations. If you have someone suffering from an opioid problem, someone suffering from a mental health problem, we don't need to have 8 or 10 police cars there. We can save money, we can be more efficient, and we can save lives. I've been endorsed, by the way, by the National Association of Social Workers, and we can make sure that we have our trained mental health, our trained drug abuse professionals involved in dealing with these emergencies, so that the police can do the job that they're truly trained for, that they're truly meant to do, and so that we don't overburden them with work that they shouldn't have to deal with.
Thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, our schools, police, and hospital ERs bear the brunt of the problems resulting from mental illness, but teachers, law enforcement officers, and first responders often say that they are not trained or equipped for this task. How would you propose handling these issues?
I love this question. I think I had served on the Assembly Mental Health Committee and have also talked a lot in the district with different organizations that are providing these types of services. I think it's particularly timely because of COVID as well, because I think that in addition to physical health effects, I think that the mental health effects of isolation, joblessness, and things like that are going to, I think, result in an uptick of mental health crises. I've talked to several school districts in my district that are doing a wonderful job partnering with groups like Parsons to provide mental health services right in schools. So I do still practice in Saratoga County Family Court as an attorney for the child, and I can tell you that meeting the child where they are in school and providing those mental health services right where they are so that we don't have to worry about parents who may be battling their own demons to be able to get them to appointments, that's really critical. So I think that's a wonderful program. I'd love to see that expanded. I also, very quickly, because I see my time is starting to run out, I think that doing the mobile outreach that some of our organizations are doing to some of our rural areas where it's harder to get access, and improving telehealth services, again, using broadband and internet connection is a great way to try to facilitate delivering mental health services to individuals and taking that burden off of teachers, et cetera.
Thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, you're going to be the first one to answer our next question. Last year, the New York State Legislature passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Its ambitious goal is to reach 100% clean energy by 2040 and reduce our state's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. What roadblocks do you see that stand in the way of reaching this goal, and what can be done in our district to support the goal?
So I voted against that bill. I voted against it. There were 35 no votes and 111 yes votes. It passed in 2019. I voted against it because I think it's essentially unachievable. And I think that I would prefer to have incentives rather than mandates. I think that this is going to be a real burden on business. And if it's a burden on business, I think that there will be a trickle-down effect and impact on the ratepayer and the consumer. So I have a real problem with that bill. I think that, let's see. Yeah, so I think that New York, I guess that what I'd like to point out is just that New York is already at such a competitive disadvantage as far as manufacturing and business. We are either the 49th or 50th state in terms of a good business climate. And I think that things like this, while valuable, I support the idea of creating alternative sources of energy and trying to reduce our carbon footprint. I agree with all of that. I just think that mandating it through this Green New Deal is just going to break the backs of businesses. It's going to keep businesses from coming to New York, and we already, especially upstate, have enough problems with that. So for those reasons, I'd rather see it done more as an incentive than as a mandate.
Thank you. Joe Seeman, last year, the New York State Legislature passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Its ambitious goal is to reach 100% clean energy by 2040 and reduce our state's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. What roadblocks stand in the way of reaching this goal, and what can be done in this district to support the goal?
Okay, so I strongly supported this as a citizen activist. I went to the Capitol demanding this. That's how we got it passed. Climate change is a real problem. It's a problem that could cause enormous problems. We saw this past week, many people in our region lost power for days. If we have more extreme weather, which all the scientists say climate change will cause, we'll have more of these power outages. Climate change, if we don't do something about it, will destroy our economy. We can invest in solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, and good green jobs that can't be outsourced, and that will make upstate New York a place where we'll have a strong economy. I've been endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters. I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I've been endorsed by the preeminent author on climate change, Bill McKibben, because I've been fighting on this issue to protect our environment for decades. We need to do this something. We can't afford not to take action on climate change, and we can invest, create jobs, we can protect our environment. Our environment is the true wealth of upstate New York. That's why people love this great capital region, because of our beautiful, sacred environment. And I pledge to do everything I can to make sure that we stop burning fossil fuels and we, New York, become the leader, the very leader in the clean energy economy of the future.
Thank you. Joe Seeman, you'll answer our next question first. Income inequality is a serious problem in our state. How would you address this problem?
Okay, well, we need to get to the causes of this. One big problem is lack of funding for our schools. We need decent educations for everyone. And again, I've been fighting here, and I'll demand that we have a budget that fully funds our schools. We need to make sure that we have a minimum wage that is tied to inflation so that we don't have to keep fighting for it every few years again. So we need to help people who are struggling. We need government services, good education, good services, and there's only one way we can fund that without balancing our budget on the backs of working class and middle class people, and that's by real budget justice, by closing all the corporate loopholes. We can take care of our working class people and help them have good jobs, good services, good educations, and that's the most important thing we can do. And of course, the green jobs that I will fight for, that's also a big part of ending income inequality.
Thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, income inequality is a serious problem in our state. How would you address this problem?
So I think that as far as education, I think that I think that education is a significant portion of our state budget, and to me, it is a strong priority for us as a state. I think we have one of the best, if not the best, educational system in the country, and I think that that's something that we can all be proud of. And I think that COVID has certainly created problems in the sense that the governor's and his budget directors 20% withhold from the education budgets has resulted in a lot of inequity, because poorer districts that rely more on state aid, like locally the Schenectady School District, are going to be hit harder by these withholds and these cuts. So I think moving forward, I think that particularly as it relates to education, I think it's important that when we're doing our state budget next year, that we consider how these withholds or cuts are going to adversely and unfairly impact the poor school districts more than the wealthier generally suburban school districts. Also, our rural school districts a lot of times are in bad shape as well in terms of a great reliance on state aid. So I think that you know, my only caveat is this: we can't fix everything by taxing people more. And we have a fundamental disagreement, my opponent and I, when it comes to that.
Thank you. Mary Beth Walsh, you will be asked this question first. Please speak to the problem of the access to affordable health care, which is a concern for many of our district residents, especially with rising COVID unemployment rates.
So I think that right now we have a Medicaid system in our state that covers a little over 6 billion people, I believe. It's a very generous program. It is second only to California in terms of cost, and California has twice as many enrollees as we do. I think that the Medicaid system is there to help, and I support it. It needs to support those people who really need it, that need that safety net so that they have health care, Child Health Plus. I think that the gaps, I think that one area where my opponent and we respectfully disagree is that where he supports the New York Health Act, I would be more supportive of taking a look at the individuals who are kind of caught in the middle, who either have very high cost policies or don't, they can't get affordable coverage in the middle. And I'd rather tailor legislation to try to assist those people, because we've got Medicaid helping the poorest. We've got private health insurance helping the people who have jobs and can afford it. We need to help the people in the middle. And I would rather consider legislation tailored to try to help those people than to completely throw out our current system and do the New York Health Act instead. It hasn't worked in any other state so far. I don't see why we should extend it to New York.
Thank you. Thank you. Joe Seeman, the question is, please speak to the problem of access to affordable health care, which is a concern for many district residents, especially with the rising COVID unemployment rate.
Okay, so the people who really need health care is everyone. And a big difference between my opponent and myself is I refuse to take any corporate money. I won't take a dime from insurance companies, and I won't be corrupted and serve their interests. Okay, I'm ready to say, let's stop paying the billions and billions of dollars of welfare to corporations, and we can do that with the New York Health Act. And people across the world, in Canada, in England, in Japan, in France, just about every developed nation across the world, except the United States, has health care for all. We are the richest state in the richest nation. We can sure afford it. We can actually save lots of money, and New York can be a leader. Remember, when we have healthcare for all New Yorkers, this is a place that people will want to move to. This is a place that people want to create jobs. And again, all the research shows very clearly that if you look at our premiums, our co-pays, our out-of-pocket expenses, when we have the New York Health Act, healthcare for all of us, we will save lots of money. The insurance companies, not so much, but the people of New York, yes, will save money. And I will not just talk about this problem, I'm going to serve in the majority, and I will fight to see that it comes to the floor for vote and it gets passed, and New York provides health care for everyone so that we don't have people dying. Yes, people have been dying from lack of health care.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Joe Seeman, you will answer the next question first. What measures might be taken to help school districts manage the loss of tax revenue that has been caused by the pandemic?
Oh, good question. We can't print money in New York. We can't make money from air, but what we could do is we could have massive cuts to our schools, but that's not right, and I won't allow it. Again, as I said before, there is only one way that we can fully fund our schools. And my opponent has said she cares about schools, but how are you going to pay for our schools? There's only one way. You can't have dramatic budget losses. You can't avoid cuts to the schools unless you simply reverse the giveaways. We have sales tax that you and I pay 7 or 8%, but Wall Street has been getting away without paying its stock transfer tax. It's been rebated for 30 or 40 years. We can reverse that. We've seen that when we created a millionaire's tax a number of years ago, while my opponent says that the rich are all going to move away when we tax them, we've seen even more millionaires after we created a millionaire's tax. So we know we can do this. We know that we can fully fund our schools if we simply take on the ultra wealthy. And again, I've pledged not to take any money from Wall Street or corporations. I won't stand with the ultra wealthy. I'll stand with our schools. I'll stand with our children, put their interests first. We can do it in New York. All we need is the political will, and that's why I'm running for the Assembly, to be that voice for our children.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Mary Beth Walsh, what measures might be taken to help school districts manage the loss of tax revenue caused by the pandemic?
So first of all, I really appreciate the rule that we're not supposed to be, taking any unfair shots at our opponents, and I really respect that. I just like to point out for the record that I am not corrupted by any donations that I have received, and my public filings are very public. My average donation is about $300. So that being said, let me address the question at hand about school districts, which is an issue that's very close to me. And I'm so grateful that the New York State United Teachers Union has endorsed my candidacy for re-election, as they have in the past. As I told the teachers and NYS recently, I think that in our current pandemic, I think that even somebody like me who really believes that in a $168 billion state budget, there is room to economize, there is room to cut, there is room for austerity, and that should be our first line of defense. Everything's got to be on the table. So I'm not saying I would absolutely never, ever, ever support a tax. I'm just saying I think that we need to first start with making responsible cuts. And where we cut, I think the last place that we want to cut right now is education. I think that is my priority. I think that is what makes our state so great, is the educational system that we have. So I do think that in our budget, there is room to make these cuts, but I do think that if we do have to look at a tax, I'm willing to take a look at it, but I really, really hope that we don't get there, because if you take a look at something like Tax Freedom Day, the first day that you get to take $1 home, it's May every year.
Thank you. Thank you. It is now time for our closing statements. The candidates will have no more than 1 minute each to give the closing statements. The first to speak will be Joe Seeman. Joe?
Again, thank you to the League for hosting tonight's debate. I'm running to represent the 130,000 residents of this district and no one else. I'm running a grassroots campaign supporting small businesses and workers. Thanks to them, I've received over double the donations my opponent has, with most of those donations under $50 and no donations from any corporations. I'm not just a proud Capital Region resident and proud New Yorker, I'm also a proud patriotic American. I won't stand for denying science, for name calling, for dividing us with racism, homophobia, chauvinism, hate, and inciting violence. As your Assembly member, I will treat people with a level of respect that is unimpeachable. Come January, I'm ready to start day one, go into those Assembly chambers and make sure you have a voice in how our taxes are spent, how that budget is balanced, not on the backs of middle class and working class people. I won't settle for politics as usual. I pledge my loyalty to you, to hold town halls, and to be your voice, to be a full-time legislator, and fight like hell for our beloved Capital Region communities.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Next is Mary Beth Walsh. Mary Beth?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. It's a little different this year, but I'm really glad that we're having it. I think that this last hour or so that we've spent together really does show that there is a very definite choice that the voters will have. There's a definite strong difference between the two candidates for this office. And, I think that I really relish my role as a public servant, and I'm very rooted in my community. And I think that rather than dealing with some other issues that are perhaps better dealt with at a federal level, I think that it's really my work in the community, being committed to the district and dealing with statewide issues, willing to do the work and to speak out when I'm needed, willing to work across the aisle to get my work done. I think that that's what really sets me apart as a legislator. I think that, one of the things I'm so proud about with my campaign is that 75% of the donations that I've received have come from right within my district. So thank you to the League.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank both our candidates for participating tonight, and to remind you to remember to vote. The general election is November 3rd. Early voting is from October 24th through November 1st. You can look up your early voting and election day sites at voterlookup.elections.ny.gov. You may also vote by absentee ballot by checking temporary illness on the application. You must request an absentee ballot by October 27th in order to vote absentee. When you receive your absentee ballot, remember to sign the envelope and mail it to the Board of Elections according to the instructions. You can request an absentee ballot online at absenteeballot.election.ny.gov. Thank you, and thank the candidates again for attending this event and helping us educate the voters. Good night.
Hey, thanks.